Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Estate Right Now, where we talk about real estate matters that matter to you. My name is Jay Izzo, and we are live here from Linda Craft Team Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina, part of the Greater Research Triangle Park. Today's show is awesome. We have never done this before, but what we are about to do is something that we have thought about doing for a while, and that is we actually went out and asked people if they had questions. So the people who view the show or listen to the show, because there's a lot of ways to watch us. You can watch us on DBTV. You can watch us live streaming, which many of you are doing right now. You can, and by the way, we're live streaming all over Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, formerly Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. We're live. And then we go to DBTV, which is available every Roku, Amazon Fire, some international cable companies as well. And then, of course, we're available by podcast on all the podcast platforms. So we reached out social media and said, hey, what questions do you have about real estate? So we have right here a list of questions that I brought back Steve Kruger, who is a senior listing and buyers expert with Linda Craft Team Realtors, and who is going to who knows everything, by the way.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no. You know everything. You are the guru. No, we're going to do our best. Is what we're going to do to attempt to answer the questions that you people have. And while we're live, if you want to bring in your questions, you can certainly write us wherever you're watching us live right now too, as well. So, Steve, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Jay.
All right. So, let's just start in with these questions.
Sure.
And then what we'll do is we will answer them as they come. John from Nebraska, good friend of mine, has a two-part question, I guess. And this is going to be similar to another question we have. Are interest rates now higher than normal, or were they artificially low and now are more back to normal? But since they were artificially low, they seem high now. Is that... Help us understand that.
That all makes perfect sense.
Okay.
And that's a great question.
Okay.
Especially, it's coming from Cornhusker country.
Yeah, it is coming from Cornhusker country.
I believe that's your homeland.
That is my homeland. And John is a personal friend of mine. We played high school football together, and he's gone on to do great things as a doctor. So it's a pretty good. Yeah, this is a pretty good question.
So we are actually extremely close to the median level for 30-year mortgages. So they've been tracking those since 1971.
Okay.
The median over that period of time, so the last, 53 years,
yeah,
is 7.4%. And when I saw the interest rates yesterday, the average 30-year mortgage was at 7.33%.
Wow.
So the answer to the question is the interest rates at the moment, or mortgage rates, are exactly right around the historical norm. They are not artificially high. They were artificially low for a very long time. I will not state that I'm an expert on this, so I'm not saying it'll, it can't happen and all kinds of things can happen. We may never again in our lifetime see 3%, below 3%, excuse me, even 4%. That all came about because of the housing crisis.
Right.
So if you look at what the interest rates were like before the housing crisis, they were in the range they are now, during the 90s, early 2000s. I bought my first house in 2000, 2001, something like that. And I was right around 7% interest. I want to say maybe 7 to 7.5. Right. I can remember they dropped not long after I bought by like half a point. And my buddy, who was my lender, was like, you need to refinance.
Right.
And then when I moved here to Raleigh, excuse me, 2006, my interest rate was right around 6.5%. So for those of us that are Gen Xers, that was kind of the norm, 6 to 7% kind of range. In the 80s, because of really high inflation, much worse than what we have at the moment, you had interest rates peak at like 18.9%.
Right. Yeah.
So, and they finished that decade right around 10%.
Right.
So to like my parents, 7% seemed great. 7.3,
Linda tells a story. Linda Kraft, who owns Linda Kraft Team Realtors, she tells a story that when she started in 1985, interest rates were around 18%.
Right.
And so when they got down to 7.5 or 7, it was like free money.
Right. That's when I bought my first house. That was kind of what everybody was talking about. It's like, hey, interest rates are down, 7%. It's time to buy a house.
Right.
I was a little late to the game as far as buying my first house, because I was like 30. I guess that's late to the game. I don't know.
I don't know.
I think it's actually probably the median median age. But so if you look at those rates, that was where we are now, was kind of the norm for a long time.
Right.
And then the Great Recession hits, which was brought on by the housing crisis. At that time, so what government does when you've got a recession is they bring down interest rates in order to stimulate the economy.
Got it.
So what they do in extreme circumstances like the Great Recession, they'll pull other tricks out of their bag, tools out of their bag of tricks.
Right. I did. I think you're going to use another phrasing that we can't use on the air.
So they use what we call quantitative easing, where the Fed actually buys up billions of dollars worth of treasury bonds, mortgage-based securities, things like that. And what that does is puts cash into the economy. What they're doing is putting billions of dollars of cash in by buying up all these bonds, which frees up the banks to then lend that to consumers and businesses.
Got it.
And so that brought the interest rates down to very low levels. Excuse me, we were in the 4 to 5% range.
Right.
And then you get to the pandemic in 2020, and we had an even bigger drop to get below 3% at one point, because private investors were now the ones buying up all the treasury bonds and things like that. Because if you think about the very early stages of that, the large investors were worried about what the economy was going to do, wanted their money into much safer investments, bought up all those things, just like what the government would do during quantitative easing, and that brought the interest rates down even further. So we actually artificially lowered interest rates as a result of the housing crisis, and they have stayed down that low. And so only now are they kind of getting back to the historical norms.
Okay, well then this jumps into a question. John had a follow-up, and this is also in correspondence with Michael from Raleigh's question. So I'm gonna read both these questions because I think they're asking the same thing here. Is it better to wait for interest rates to come down some before buying, or buy now, and if rates go down, refinance? And Michael M has a similar question. Is now a good time to buy a house, or should the buyer wait? And what would hurt or help them by buying now or waiting? So I think both those questions are pretty similar.
They are.
And yet there's a kind of a twist on both. So how would you answer those questions for John and Michael?
So I would say if you're interested in buying a house, now is the time to do it. I would not wait for interest rates to drop. So the funny thing about the housing market is when we get a drop in interest rates, you're going to see a drop in the supply of houses. People think it might be the opposite, that the interest rates come down, more people put their houses on the market, which can be true. It can get some people out of there that are locked into certain mortgage, but you end up with an increase in demand. So there's a lot of people sitting on the fence right now. What they're seeing is it's not so much the rate itself, it's the change in rates. There are people that are sitting around like, I'm willing to take the plunge, but now that we're up at 7.33%, I want it to get back down to 6.5. If that were to happen, that stimulates a lot of buying, starts to shrink the inventory while at the same time the demand's going up. So the prices are going to rise. We had that happen the early part of 2024, January and February. The market was red hot. We felt like we were right back into 2021 and 2022, where everything's getting multiple offers. It's going well above list price. We were seeing houses being sold sight unseen. We just were right back to this crazy market. It has since cooled off as those interest rates went back up above 7. And it's not so much that, there's going to come a point, let's just say it went all the way back up to 8, then it drops back to, let's say, 7.5. The same phenomenon is going to happen. It's the change in the rate more than the actual rate that will have these impacts. And so a really good understanding of it, I actually did some numbers. I'm a math
I know
guy.
you're a numbers guy.
And so to give you a good example, if you wanted to buy a $500,000 house right now, I am going to use my notes on this.
Okay.
Like most stuff I can remember off the top of my head, but you want to buy a $500,000 house and you want to put 10% down. So you're going to borrow $450,000. At 7.31%, this is not including your prepaids and escrows and all that. That's just the straight mortgage rate, $3,088 a month. If that drops down a point to 6.31%, you're at $2,788 a month. So you are saving $300 a month, $3,600 a year. And that's what people are looking at and thinking, I want to save that money. If the interest rates drop 1%, I can almost promise you that house prices will increase 5 to 10% as soon as that happens. There will be unleashed demand on low inventory. And low inventory is here to stay. This is not
right.
We'll probably get into on a later question, so I won't dive too much into it. But with low inventory and those interest rates going down, whether it's a half point, a point, you're going to see prices rise. So let's say the price rose by 5% between now. So let's just say it's 2 months from now, that interest rate goes all the way down to 6.31%. So that house that you wanted to buy for 500,000 is now 525,000 if it went up 5%. If it went up 10%, it's 550,000. So while you're waiting to save $3,600 a year on your mortgage, you just paid 25 grand more for the house at 5%, 50 grand more at 10%. That $3,600 a year savings at 25,000, that's going to take you 7 years to balance it out. And you're probably not in that house 7 years. Some people certainly are, but you may sell that house in 5 years. You may sell it in 3 years. Not to mention, if the interest rate does drop enough, you would just refinance it. So I would absolutely not wait for those interest rates to drop, because prices are going to rise. Forget what my point was going to be there on that, but the interest rates right now. Oh, I know what my point was going to be. You can buy a house right now without competing. So I don't want to say that completely. A great house, it doesn't matter what the market's like. A great house will often have competing offers.
Sure.
But for the most part, we're not seeing just multiple offers on everything. Those interest rates drop significantly, like 0.5% to 1%. You're going to see you're right back in competing offers. You're having to offer more money. You're going to have sellers in North Carolina, where we have due diligence. You're going to pay a higher due diligence fee, which is a non-refundable deposit. You're going to have sellers less willing to do any repairs because they got a huge due diligence fee out of you. So absolutely, here in North Carolina, where due diligence plays a part, like I was talking about, absolutely buy now before you have to compete with everybody for that house.
That's awesome. Great information. And I think the thing that people need to, really hold on to is that the low inventory is not going to change.
Low inventory is not going away. So to give you an understanding of that, and this is what I don't think everybody quite understands. We've had interest rates more than double in 2 years time frame, right? And prices haven't dropped. They've still gone up. Now, they slowed down considerably, but they haven't dropped because of that. And that's because there's not enough inventory. And all the forecasts say that's not going away. We're probably 5 years out, maybe longer.
Maybe longer.
The a really good another thing I've got notes on, so I can give you very precise numbers. From 1968 to 2006, the U.S. averaged 1.1 million single-family homes built per year. From 2007 to 2023, this is all because of the housing crisis, and then also the early stages of COVID because of supply shortages. 765,000 units built. So we've been building far fewer houses because of the housing crisis. If you think about the housing crisis, builders stopped building.
That's like almost 500,000 houses.
Right. Developers stopped developing. All that stopped for a period of time. And then it can't just ramp up immediately because the developers have to start developing the land again. Then they have to build the houses.
Well, interest rate, I mean, builders have to still deal with interest rates. And then when interest rates are higher, it makes it tougher for them to build a house and be profitable.
Yeah. So, and then the second part to that, and we've talked about this on one of the podcasts before, is millennials. The millennials are a larger demographic than Generation X. So they have, now that they are the biggest group of purchasers in this country, they are putting more demand on the market than Generation X put on the market.
Right.
And so at the same time they're putting more demand, we have less supply because of the housing crisis.
Yeah, this is interesting. You know, the millennials, and we call them millennials. I really don't like the term. I think the more accurate term, which has been used, is the echo boomer.
I thought, yeah.
Okay, because because you know the
I was gonna make a joke.
Yeah, I know you were. I could see your face going to do that. But
I'm Gen X.
Yeah, right. Well, we are right. I'm the very beginning of it. The very, very beginning of it. So the boomer generation was the largest generation we ever had.
Right.
And then there's us, right? Smaller families. And then there's the next generation that's huge.
Right.
That millennial generation or the echo boomer generation is huge.
Right.
And it really is, they're not the same, of course, how they psychographically but demographically, it's very similar when you take a look at it. So yeah, that's good. That's a big deal.
The one other thing affecting the inventory, talking about baby boomers, they're staying in their houses longer than the generations before them.
Right.
So that's putting less inventory out into the market.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good. All right. So we're going to change. Well, no, let's stay in this vein. Earl from Raleigh wants to know, do you think real estate values are overpriced, and will we see a correction in the near future?
No. I've heard this question before, and a lot of people think because we had this huge spike during the pandemic, we saw in a 4-year period of time, property values go up 50%.
Right.
Here in the Triangle, nationwide, at this point, maybe it's 60%. I think, first of all, that was the market correction. Nobody ever says, because we lost all this value during the housing crisis, and I'm talking now looking backwards 10 years, people weren't like, does that mean prices are going to skyrocket, right? Because it would be the same logic. You're just talking the reverse. So to me, the market correction has already happened, because think about this. You go into the housing crisis, and that lasted 4 to 5 years. And let's say property values dropped 5% a year during that period of time. Let's call it 5 years. There's compounded interest here, but let's keep it easy. 5 years, your house dropped in value by 25%. Or I'm sorry, your house should have been going up. Let's just call it 5%. You know, nationwide, 4 to 6%. Let's call it 5%. That 5-year period of time, your value should have gone up by 25%. Instead, it went down by, let's call it 10%. It's a 35% swing. So we come out of the housing crisis, your house should have been worth 35% more than what it was. So on you owned a $500,000 house, it should have gone up 25%. That's like $625,000. Instead, it dropped 10%. It's worth $450,000. So your value was almost 2/3 lower than it should have been. And then we came out of that, and we just had sort of slow, steady appreciation. We didn't just, boom back and regain that value. And then you get to where and at the same time, interest rates are incredibly low. You probably should have seen higher annual appreciation. it took the pandemic to do that because of this extreme change in the dynamic of supply versus demand. And I think everybody regained that 35% that they lost. If
Mm,
you think about it, your house was worth two-thirds of what it should have been coming out. That's what just happened, right? Your value just went up 50 to 60% means it went from two-thirds value to full value. Like the correction happened during the pandemic. Now things are calming down. We're back to, like last year was below, at least for Wake County, below 5%. And that's because of a huge spike in interest rates, which is also an abnormal thing, right?
mm,
So I think we'll get back to typical, 5 to 6% appreciation. It's going to have some ups and downs because right now we're very sensitive to these interest rates, but they're not bringing values down. Prices aren't dropping. You might see a short term drop because, like, we had that spike in January and February, and now a little cooling off as the interest rates got over 7%. So is something selling right now slightly less than it did in January and February? Yeah. But does that mean that it's still higher than it was in December? Yeah. So, no, I do not expect houses. I don't expect a huge price correction. I think that this is the baseline, and
mm.
you'll see somewhat normal appreciation. Who knows what kind of crazy things might happen to affect all this? But
Okay, so we're gonna great answer, by the way.
thanks.
Okay, we got a few minutes left, and I hate launching this question at you in a few minutes.
That's okay.
But I think it's a great question. And Stephen Raleigh asks, what will the impending lawsuit with NAR and the settlement mean for buyers, sellers, and realtors?
Right. That's a great question. Um, and it's an interesting one because we're all trying to figure that out ourselves as realtors. The interesting thing that I don't think a lot of people recognize, it part of it's going to depend on how old you are, right? My parents bought houses before there were buyers agents, so they know the way the market used to work. I think for people my age and younger, they assume maybe this isn't that sellers used to pay less. That's not the case. If and you can get various commission rates. I'm not saying anything's a set number, but if you think about before, buyer's agency was established because of a class action lawsuit,
Mm,
because buyers were being taken advantage of.
mm,
And so there was literally a class action lawsuit over that. A real estate company in Minnesota lost. This is in like 1991, I believe. And the quick response to that, excuse me, nationwide was the establishment of buyer's agency. So before that, if an agent charged you 6% commission to sell your house, they kept all 6%, but they did a lot more work than a listing agent does right now. They were the ones, they had to open the door every time somebody wanted to come in and see the house. They just, there was no buyer's agent doing that buyer's agent's work. So when that buyer now needed to come do their home inspection, when they wanted to come just measure to make sure that their couch would fit in the living room. That listing agent had to keep going and doing all these things. So buyer's agent was established, and the decision was we'll split it with this buyer's agent who's taking on half of our work. It might not be half, but
a percentage of the work.
right. So that's why they divided it up. And then the problem became, especially in 1991, where a lot of first-time home buyers just barely had the money to get into the house. They couldn't afford to now pay a buyer's agent to help them. So the realtors actually came up with a smart solution, which was sellers are going to pay this. We're still going to charge
Mm,
6%, but we'll split that commission with the buyer's agent. So sellers didn't all of a sudden start paying more money. This concept that I'm the seller and I'm paying the buyer's agent. I'm not saying you're not, but you didn't start paying more money in commissions. And at the end of the day, the buyer was always really paying that commission because my degree's in economics, as you know, and we have a saying, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch.
mm.
Those of you that took Econ 101, that's Tanstoffel. Or if you're about to take Econ 101, remember that. So even though we think of it as seller paid, the buyer was paying it because if the seller knew I I don't have to pay a buyer's agent commission. Yes, I'll sell the house for $15,000 less or whatever it might be.
Whatever the number is. Yeah.
So that's why it was established. So now what I think is going to happen is, in a lot of circumstances, seller's still going to end up paying very similar, because we will just negotiate contracts that say you are selling this house for 500,000, and so on the listing side we're going to say, if it's instead of 6%, I might say 3.6%. I'm charging you, and then we'll negotiate with the buyers and their agent, and then their agent may put in an offer that says, I get 2.4%. So we're either adding that into this price. Your house is at 500. We're actually going to offer you 2.4% above that. If your house has been sitting on the market for a while, they may offer you 500,000 and say you're going to pay my 2.4%. And really, that's no different than if you were paying that full 6% commission to your listing agent.
So basically, you're not expecting a lot to change.
So here's where I think it could get interesting: is you're going to have plenty of buyers that want to go represent themselves. And there's this thought that I've got the internet, I can find the houses. How hard is this? And those of you that think that all we do is just open doors and show people houses, you don't understand what all is entailed. When you hire someone like me who has sold nearly 500 homes, I know what to help you avoid. I know how to save you tons of money. I have a client right now who owns a house in Durham that they did not use a buyer's agent, or at least they didn't use me. But they are going to have me sell that house. It was new construction, and the way the lot is configured, their house is worth less than what they paid for it. And it also backs up to a busy road, which doesn't hurt when it's new construction, because everybody's like, look at my new shiny bauble.
Right.
But when you go to resell it, and also if there's less new construction on the market at the time, it's a supply and demand thing. But you get to where it's a resale, and an experienced agent knows to tell you this house is worth 5 to 10% less than the other ones in the neighborhood, because I sit on the back porch and I hear road noise. Right. So experienced agents, Malcolm Gladwell said it, like, if someone is an expert, they're worth their money. So what I think is going to happen is those of us that are very experienced are going to benefit from people now looking at, okay, when I hire a buyer's agent, I want to make sure I've got someone that knows what they're doing. And I think some people will buy unrepresented, and they're going to get taken advantage of.
Yes.
They're going to make some big mistakes.
Yes.
There could be more lawsuits coming, just like the one that created buyer's agency in the first place. So it's going to be interesting to see what all the results are.
Yeah. Good stuff. We're out of time. We're over time, actually.
I thought it might be.
Tell people how they get a hold of you if they got questions, more questions.
I am Steve Kruger with Linda Craft Team. You can call me 919-740-9795. Text me. I love text messages. Or you can email me, steve@lindacraft.com, LINDACRAFT.com.
Thanks, Steve. Folks, listen to the show. You had a lot of choices, chose us. Thank you. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Listening on your favorite podcast platform, give us a positive review. We appreciate that. As I say to you every week, you know what? Thank you so much, and ciao, everybody.